Good evening. On behalf of the Islesboro Forum Committee, welcome to the third program of the 2022 Islesboro Forum Speaker Series. Thank you for joining us tonight. I'm Gail Jackson, and I will be your moderator for this evening. This is our 30th year of presenting distinguished speakers to the island community. Our program tonight is exclusively in person, but we are recording the program so that if someone wants to view it afterwards, they can look it up on YouTube or on our website, islesboroforum.org, where you'll be able to see it in its entirety. Before we introduce our speaker, I want to acknowledge and thank the 7 other committee members for their excellent support and ideas, and our technical producer, Michael Hutcherson, without which we would be, a big hand for Michael. Thank you for recognizing him. Please consider making a donation to the forum. There's a sweet little hand-woven basket over there. Our costs for our 6 programs will be about $1,500, so we hope you will want to make a donation to help cover our costs. Our format tonight will be to hear remarks from our speaker on his life in the golden age of Hollywood and Washington, and then for him to take questions from the audience. I understand that Virginia Guest Valentine is hosting a reception to which all are invited immediately following the talk. And as far as I know, it will be right within the confines of this room. So welcome to that afterwards. I will ask a longtime Islesboro Forum Committee member Amanda Hobart, whose ideas and execution of essential tasks have been invaluable to us over the years. I will ask her to introduce our speaker, George Stevens, Jr. So Amanda, would you take the podium? Do you want to hold this?
So indeed, and I would add to the donations, if you care to go to our website, you can make a donate online if you care, and that some people have found that useful. George Stevens Jr. is our guest, and we are all so proud of that. He was born in the depth of the Great Depression in 1932, raised in Los Angeles, Hollywood. He's had a liberal arts education at Occidental College and built a career then as author, filmmaker, and director in Hollywood. And then, as an advocate for artisans, all arts, social justice, and public policy in the highly political world of our nation's capital, Washington, D.C. Stevens' number of honors, Emmys, prizes, and humanitarian awards for his gifts to our lives, American culture, and politics comprise a list too lengthy to mention here. We're very proud of all he's been able to do, and you'll be able to look those up with no trouble. He is father of 6 grandchildren and husband of Elizabeth Guest, a longer-term summer resident of Islesboro. Having retired from a golden age in our lifetime, George Stevens Jr. has shared his and our many grand national advances of busy, often turbulent years with his book, My Place in the Sun. Where is My Place in the Sun? You want this book. You're not going to have any trouble finding it. It's back there, and George is very glad to autograph them as we finish, and with Virginia's generous invitation for a little cheese and wine afterwards. My Place in the Sun, Life in the Golden Age of Hollywood and Washington. It records George's memories, yours and mine, and many more, with the exceptional, truly extraordinary experience of his own. They are truly informative, entertaining, and often very amusing. Stevens is a witty storyteller of the amazing rapid progression and wide value of another major era and America's still burgeoning life for our national culture and social justice. It's my honor and privilege to introduce my Washington neighbor and fellow activists in the field of arts, justice, and looking forward to another grand era. George?
Hello, everybody. What a delightful turnout on such a hot day. I must say that they have the room very nice and cool. So first, thanks to all of you for being here, and thanks to our great appreciation to Gail and Amanda and the community center for organizing this. And also to the island's technical wizard, Michael Hutcherson, who has put together those lovely pictures and taken care of everything else for the occasion. And also to Anne Miriam of the delightful Book Point store in Main Point Bookstore. And she's organized books for any of you who are in search of reading material to while away the remainder of the summer. And also I want a special thanks to Caroline Stevens, my daughter, for helping us organize all the pictures that are in this book, and for helping with making the arrangements today. And finally, and perhaps most importantly, Virginia Guest, Virginia Valentine, who's going to provide something for us to eat and chew on when I stop talking, which will perhaps make you feel more urgently about me stopping talking, knowing that you have something to look forward to. I am here, obviously, to talk about My Place in the Sun, Life in the Golden Age of Hollywood and Washington. And should any of you be wondering why I wrote this book, you would not be the first. But it happens, just for a point of information, that at some point I became aware that I was leading a kind of especially interesting life. And I saved letters, photographs, professional papers, and I made notes, as had my mother and father, giving me a set of useful tools for such a project. And I value history. So some years ago, I wrote out a chronology, kind of typed, kind of number of pages, and then I'd add to it, just kind of getting memories in order. And then a few years later, I began writing about what I'd seen and about what I learned, and with a special emphasis on family. I did not discuss the idea with my agent or publisher because I wasn't sure about this business of writing about oneself. An act of narcissism, I think we can say fairly. All of those pages, it's a touch of narcissism and arrogance. But it's interesting, kind of having written the book and looking at it, I kind of understood something I hadn't understood before, is that because of my growing up and working in Hollywood, and coming to Washington, founding the American Film Institute, creating the Kennedy Center Honors, and producing it for 37 years. In each of those areas and politics in Washington, Liz and I had the most amazing spectrum of friendships and colleagues. And now that I read this book, I realize that kind of perhaps somewhere in my inner motivation for writing it was wanting to preserve some of the memories of the extraordinary people that we've known and worked with. But so anyway, without telling my agent or publisher, I started to write and was doing quite well. And then COVID came, and I had nothing else to do. And we had, Liz and I have a lovely house in Georgetown and 2 nice Springer Spaniels and a wonderful place to write, indoor and out. And so I finished the book, and I rewrote it and refined it and trimmed it and, all of that. And it was really during COVID, that I finished it, and we got it to the publisher, and here it is. I was both the gifted, very gifted Doris Kearns Goodwin, who writes so beautifully about Lincoln and the Roosevelts, and presidential historian Michael Beschloss, who introduced me at Politics and Prose, a book event. And Michael's also a good friend. And when he did that, both of them pleased me by saying that I had written American history, which was not exactly what I was thinking when I did it, but now that I look at it, all right. That Michael at the Politics and Prose event, he said that the first 3 paragraphs of George's book show a style of writing history, and he asked me to read it to the people in attendance, which I did. And I thought I would just do that for you tonight as a kind of hors d'oeuvre. And also I want to read the dedication. First, the dedication for George Stevens and Michael Stevens, men of creativity and decency. I was blessed to have my journey nourished, first by my father, then by my elder son, savoring their humor and courage. And chapter 1 is called San Francisco. A fog-shrouded September night in 1900, Landers Stevens was the last to leave the Dewey Theater on 12th Street in Oakland, the town of his birth. He secured the doors, packed the receipts in his pouch, and bid the watchman good night. Landers was just 24, but the playbill from the day lists him as proprietor and manager of the Dewey, where he directed the plays and was the company's leading man. Tall and square-jawed, always carefully dressed, he set off briskly down Broadway to catch the last ferry across the bay to San Francisco. When he turned onto 14th Street, 2 toughs sprang from the darkness and tackled him. As the San Francisco Call reported the next day, one of the robbers struck him a powerful blow on the face at the point of the jaw, staggering Landers and nearly knocking him insensible. He gathered himself, threw off one of the men, managed to draw his pistol, and beat down the assailant with a 6 blows on the face with the clubbed weapon. Nursing a severely cut hand and swollen jaw, Landers told the Call reporter the next day that it was the hardest battle he ever fought. While I was fighting the man whom I captured, the first man recovered and ran. I didn't want to take a chance of killing him, so I did not fire. John Landers Stevens was my grandfather. And it goes on from there. So I thought tonight that I just would tell you a little bit about the book and just kind of jump around a little bit. And I hope that some of you may have questions, because I think it'd be nice to, and perhaps be more illuminating at some point for me to do a question and answer, so you can think about if you have any questions. But my grandparents, Landers Stevens, I heard about him. He was married, my great-grandmother, he was my grandfather, my great-grandmother was named Georgia Woodthorpe, and she was born just after the Civil War in San Francisco. And when she was about 10, she went to what was called an acting club with her parents just to visit. And one of the great Shakespearean actors of the day, I think Thomas MacDonagh was his name, just thought she was fascinating and asked her father if he could come and be a child performer in the theater, and she did. Well, she went on to have a wonderful career and became a great leading lady in San Francisco and toured around the country. And she has a singular distinction. She is the youngest Ophelia to Edwin Booth's Hamlet. For those who don't know, Edwin Booth was the greatest of American Shakespearean actors, famed for his Hamlet, and otherwise had a wonderful life, except for his brother, also an actor, who assassinated Abraham Lincoln, John Wilkes Booth. And he married Landers, the daughter of Georgia Woodthorpe. That's where these Georges and Georgies and all that come from. I will interrupt myself to say, because Georgia Woodthorpe's daughter was Georgie Cooper, Georgia having married a Cooper. And of course, her son was George Stevens, Sr. When Liz gave birth to our son Michael, my father flew to the bedside, and he was wonderful with cameras, as you may expect, and he had the Polaroid camera and all, and got the wonderful pictures. And Liz and I had not agreed on a name, and so about 3 days later, we're sitting talking, and Dad said, are you going to name this boy? And I said, oh, sure, Dad, we are. And then I said, kind of a trial balloon, I said, what would you think if we called him George? And Dad nodded, and he said, George the Third. Well, he said, I think that's why we left England. and thereby he saved Michael and Lily's father from becoming Georgie Triple Sticks, And so he was named Michael Murrow Stevens. So they had Georgie Cooper and Landers Stevens were great stars of the stage in San Francisco and touring on the Orpheum circuit. And my father and his brother they didn't have help, so that they were around the theater and in the evenings. My father, he was about 12. I read this interview that he gave later about he would do his homework under the stage, but he remembered his favorite was A Tale of Two Cities, when his father played Sidney Carton. Most of you have read A Tale of Two Cities. And Dad talked about this, and I heard this recording, and it moved me because he was saying that I would sit under the stage and I would wait for the end, and then I would close my book, and I would hear my father climb the steps to the guillotine, and I would hear his voice. I was sitting in the darkness, and the audience above out there, and he would say, it's a far, far better thing I do than I have ever done before. It is a far, far better place I go to than I have known. And then you would hear the sound of the guillotine coming down. And then he said he could feel the silence of the audience. He said, and then the curtain came down, and all of a sudden, all is one. They applauded, And hearing my father tell that story, I realized why he was a film director, or why he was a director, that he got this understanding of the audience in the dark under that theater. And he went to school in San Francisco, but the movie business, which would become his salvation, really put his parents out of business because everybody started going to the movies. So Landers and Georgie moved to Los Angeles. And my father loved reading and education, and he was in the 10th grade and looking forward to going to Glendale High School in the 10th grade. And his father, actors, don't know how many are here tonight, there are some of them that are rather vain. And I think that also applied to Landers Stevens in some respects, because he took my father out of high school because Landers didn't want to learn how to drive a car, and to have him drive him to auditions at all the studios around town. And so my father never got to finish school, but he got books from Glendale High School and educated himself and read Eugene O'Neill and all of the great plays, and became this sort of wonderfully broadly educated man. And then he got a job as a cameraman, assistant cameraman, and by the time he was 25, he was the director of photography for all the Laurel and Hardy movies, and also a gag writer, working with Leo McCarey, the director. So he got this, the sense of humor in our family may have come really alive there. And then my mother's mother was in vaudeville in New York, and her first husband was a saloon keeper in Chicago who had a touch of the Irish flu, and was drinking all the profits. So my grandmother and Yvonne, her daughter, when she was a baby, they went back to San Francisco, and Alice resumed in vaudeville. Her new husband got tuberculosis. They had to go somewhere warm. Her new husband had been in a quartet with Max Sennett, who left Broadway, vaudeville, to go to make movies. My grandmother got a job with Max Sennett. Her name was stage name was Alice Howell, and when Charlie Chaplin came to the Max Sennett studios, my grandmother Alice, she is in the first 5 movies that Charlie Chaplin made, and then she went on to have a great career as a silent film comedian, of which those of you who get engaged in this will read about and see pictures of in the book. And she had become friends with Oliver Hardy. And one night, my mother and her stepfather went to Oliver Hardy's for dinner. They'd been invited. And he was late. He was shooting in Culver City. Finally, the word came that he was coming home, and he was bringing his cameraman. And my mother, in an oral history she did, and she said, I figured some old coot, and in walks 300-pound Oliver Babe Hardy, and behind him this 25-year-old, I guess he was 27 by then, year-old cameraman who was quite handsome. And my mother said, well, you can take it from there. So anyway, then, I'm not going to tell you the whole story of the book, but he then, as many of you know, went on to become a very successful director, first with Alice Adams, with Katharine Hepburn in Swing Time, the greatest of the Astaire Rogers pictures, Gunga Din, my favorite, and all sorts of comedies. But then in 1943, shortly after the end of 42, he decided that he couldn't live in Hollywood while this war was going on, that he ought to apply his talents. So he went overseas for 3 years. I was going to show some of these pictures that number 1, Michael. That was when my parents, when they got married. And number 3 is when Dad was about to go overseas, and I believe the Empire State Building should be behind me, but I'm not going to turn around. and Dad was away for 3 years, and he did some of the great combat footage of World War II, and D-Day, the liberation of Paris, the Battle of the Bulge, and notably Dachau, which was a very formative thing in his life. And he made sure when he got there, he ceased to become a reporter. He became a gatherer of evidence, and they shot this incredible color film and black and white of what went on there, knowing that one day some people would say that it hadn't happened. So just to okay, I went while he was overseas. I didn't know much about movies. I knew a lot about baseball. I could tell you the batting averages of everybody on the Hollywood Stars Pacific Coast Leaf team. And my mother came to me one day and said, on Thursday night, we're going to this event. And I said, we can't go then. There's a twilight doubleheader with the San Francisco Seals. And she said, no, we're going. And it turned out to be the Academy Awards. And I remember I was 11 or 12, 11, I think, and 12. And I remember I had an itchy suit. But we sat down with all the people, you know, because my father was nominated as Best Director for The More the Merrier, the wonderful film with Joel McCrea and Jean Arthur and Charles Coburn, one of the great comedies. And I was, my job was to accept the Oscar. You presume he wins it. But Jean Arthur was seated near us. Jennifer Jones, Greer Garson, all the nominees, the best actresses. And when one of the other women's picture would win for Best Art Direction, they were just so charming, they would applaud. It was all this graciousness. And the man came out, Mark Sandrich, a director, read the nominees for Best Director, and he opened the envelope, and he said, Michael Curtiz, Casablanca. My mother said in that moment of silence before applause, and I guess I had a rather hefty voice for a 10-year-old, I said, we was robbed. And so when my father came back from the war, he gave me a summer job, and it was two things. One, to read. I was 17, and I was to read and outline Theodore Dreiser's An American Tragedy, Part 1 and Part 2, every scene, every character, every incident, because he was about to start the screenplay of A Place in the Sun, which would become the film with Montgomery Clift and Elizabeth Taylor and Shelley Winters. And the other job was to read all this stuff that came from Paramount, and they were treacly love stories that were not good company for me on hot afternoons, and some screenplays and all. One day, a book arrived, about this size, a novel, and I read it in the afternoon. I started at 1 o'clock, and by 5 o'clock, I'd finished it, and I went to see Dad that night, and he was in bed reading, and I said, Dad, I had the book in hand. I said, this is really a good story. I think you ought to read it. And he looked at me and said, why don't you tell me the story? So I found myself pacing around his bed, trying to reconstruct what I remembered from the afternoon to make the story interesting. And the story was a novel by Jack Schaefer called Shane. And the next summer, I would be in Jackson Hole, Wyoming, my first job on a movie on Shane, when we were there with Alan Ladd and Jean Arthur and Jack Palance and all those great actors making this historic Western. And so that's kind of how I got drawn into the medium that, took up a lot of my time. In 1951, I went to the Academy Awards with my father. And I sat next to him. And Joseph L. Mankiewicz, you may know that name, director of All About Eve and many wonderful films. He'd won for All About Eve the year before, so he was presenting the award. And he came out on the stage, and he read the nominees. John Huston for The African Queen, William Wyler for Detective Story, Vincent Minnelli for An American in Paris, Elia Kazan for A Streetcar Named Desire, and George Stevens for A Place in the Sun. Well, I would not have called you all together here were it not. And of course, he read the envelope, and it was A Place in the Sun. And Dad accepted his first Oscar that night. And going home, he was driving the car. My mother and his mother, actress, was in the back seat, and the Oscar was in the seat between my father and me. And I don't know why, or maybe he thought I was too excited, as I was 18 or what, I don't know what. But anyway, he looked over at me and he said, we'll have a better idea what kind of a film this is in about 25 years. This is before Cinematheques, before DVDs and streaming. Pictures came and went. But he knew, having read great literature, having read plays, he knew what was important about works of art is how do they last? The test of time. And the test of time is an important part of this book. Now, my father, in 1951, did not know when he told that story and planted that idea in my mind that I would be the founding director of the American Film Institute. But he did. It's one of the pleasures of writing a book like this. You find out kind of what's important in the life you've lived. And that idea of the test of time, it's really guided almost everything I've done. I mean, I hope that the films I make and the work I do and the plays I write, that they will last and be around. And it's one of the great things about movies. We just did, Steven Spielberg called me a little over a year ago, and he said, your father's Giant is a masterpiece. He said, with 4K, they can do wonderful work to correct some of the blemishes that have come to the film over the years. So we did this 4K restoration of Giant. And Stephen and I introduced it at Grauman's Chinese in April. To an audience with an IMAX screen, and to show that film, it was 67 years after the film had premiered in that theater. And when that picture came on, restored in brilliant color, this powerful story, 3 hours and 20 minutes, just takes the audience along with it. And Liz and I sat there, and to hear the laughter and an audience alive like that. My father had said 25 years about A Place in the Sun. Well, here it's 67 years, for Giant. And anyway, it's a good idea, this test of time. Now, I'm taking up a lot of your time here. Let me just pick. Why don't you show that in photo number 4? Boom. That is from Giant. That's I'm that I'm that fellow on the left. It's Elizabeth Taylor next to me, and James Dean and my father. And just put up a photo number 7, and I'll try to move this along, because there's one thing I just want to talk to you about, because, in fact, I know, many, I see some younger people here, and Anne Frank, in her wonderful book, that became the subject of my father's first film after Giant. And he asked me to be the associate producer, and I worked with him, and I ended up directing the location scenes in Amsterdam. But before we shot the film, he and Dad, we went to Europe, and we went to Dachau, and then we went to Normandy, revisiting. He hadn't been back to Europe since the war, and we went to Juno Beach, where he landed. And then we went to Amsterdam, and went to downtown Amsterdam and rang the bell at a little office. And a tall man with balding, silver hair welcomed us, and we went in. And that was Otto Frank. Otto Frank is the father of Anna Frank. Otto Frank had been in the German army in the First War. And then after the war, when the Jews became purged in Germany, they left for Amsterdam, and he started a successful spice business. And they were, of course, Jewish, and they were asked to wear yellow stars, or told to yellow. And he realized that things were getting dangerous. People were being shipped away. So he and his family, his 2 daughters, Anna, who would write of that experience, and another family hid on the top floor of this spice factory. Well, Otto Frank, and he had married Anne, and his 2 daughters and his wife were lost in the concentration camps. And he married a woman he'd met at Auschwitz, and she was with us. And we sat and had coffee, and he went to a filing cabinet, and he pulled open this drawer and brought something out wrapped in cloth, and opened it, and it was Anna Frank's diary. Is that? Yes, that is me with Anne Frank's diary. And later, Otto Frank took us to the Prinsengracht, where this spice factory, which was now empty. And the 3 of us went upstairs, and he took me behind the hidden bookcase, and he showed us where the Germans had come in, and described how they found his briefcase, which had the money and all the valuables, and how they shook everything out on the floor, and they gathered up the money, the jewelry, and then herded them away, and left all these papers. And they had left the evidence. The papers were Anna Frank's diary, which would be assembled and read by 80 million people. This girl's voice, Hitler's voice, went away, but her voice has been sustained. And to a certain extent, our film is part of that. And I like to think a film that has stood the test of time. Now, I had other stuff, but I do want to have some time for questions. I must say, I've got to say quickly that my life changed. Edward R. Murrow, how should I say it? John F. Kennedy appointed Edward R. Murrow to head the United States Information Agency. Edward R. Murrow and I met. I was 29 years old. He asked me to come and see him on Sunday when he was in Los Angeles and Hollywood, and asked me to come run the motion picture service of the United States Information Agency. I told him I couldn't do it because my father was starting the greatest story ever told, his film of the life of Jesus. I was now his partner, and I felt I couldn't leave him. And it was a very hard thing to do, but I told Murrow no. A few days later, 3 days later, I was at 20th Century Fox with Dad, and we're walking to lunch, And we hadn't talked about this, and I told him. And he stopped walking, and he looked at me and he said, I think you may have to do it. And at considerable sacrifice to himself, he saw that this might be a way of me finding my own path. And so he did that. And as I write in the book, I think he was also teaching me how to be a father, because it became a life-changing experience for me, working with President Kennedy, making all the films that we made for the USIA, starting the American Film Institute, and notably meeting the woman I would have never married had I not given up Hollywood and ended up in Washington, of course, Elizabeth. And also in the package with Elizabeth, he beat me to the punch. Part of the deal was that Caroline became my beloved daughter. And so I'm kind of moving swiftly here. I was going to, let's see. I think I've done enough talking, and I think it'd be more fun if I find out if you folks have any questions, and if you don't have any questions, I'll fake it. Do I see any? Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Lee. Thank you, Lee. I knew somebody would save me.
37 years.
Yes.
The Kennedy Center Honors.
Yeah.
6 or 7 awardees every year. Become the greatest event in Washington every year. George, just looking back at all those awardees, tell us an anecdote about some awardee that was such a great moment.
Gosh,
I remember
Lee.
Catherine Hepburn standing up and talking about Spencer Tracy.
Yes, from the Bond.
Yeah.
Yeah. I want to tell you one. Have you heard of Leontine Price? Leontine was an honoree. And part of the honors is that the honorees never speak or perform. They don't sing for their supper. And it's one of the pleasures of it. Hubert Dilworth was her manager, a rather formidable man. And he called, and this is while we're preparing, and he said, Mr. Stevens, what would you like Miss Price to sing? And I said, oh, Mr. Dilworth, I said, you don't understand. The honorees are never asked to sing or perform. Mr. Stevens, what would you like Miss Price to sing? She was the youngest of the honorees. Jimmy Cagney was one and all. And Dilworth was conscious of her still wanting to be a star. And I finally ironed it out with him, and she didn't sing. And then afterwards, I got this note, which I recite in the book, the next morning with a beautiful record album from Leontine, saying, you run the greatest, tightest ship, or something, and let me know if there's anything I can do for you. And I said, I said, I'm not a total opportunist, but I picked up the phone and called the Ritz-Carlton and asked for Miss Price. And I said, I'm so happy to receive the record and all. And you asked if you could ever do anything for me. Will you sing at the honors next year? And she said, I will be there. Along about, I guess it was October, I get a call from Mr. Dilworth. Mr. Stevens, he said, I just need to talk to you. Miss Price, the honors were on December 6th, has a performance of Aida in San Francisco on December 5th, on Saturday. I said, well, I understand, Mr. Dilworth, these things happen. He said, no. He said, you do not understand. Miss Price gave you her word. Leontine Price sang Aida in San Francisco, took her curtain call, put on a fur coat with her makeup, got into a car, flew to Chicago, no private jets in those days, changed planes in Chicago, and flew to Washington. I came to work at John, you remember how we used to go to the Kennedy Center on Sunday, what a big day it was. I walked in from the back and looked, and the stage was dark except for the ghost light, the traditional light that stays on all night on the stage. And I stood in the back and I saw a figure standing there in a fur coat, and it was Leontine Price. And she had come, I guess, from the airport to check out the stage. And then she started to sing Visa d'arte, My Life is Art, which is what she would sing that night. And there was something about this woman who'd flown all night, not worrying about her voice or her health, to keep a commitment and standing there singing that aria that was so moving. And I've got 47 others leave, but
George, I have a question.
yes.
Isn't there a famous story about you being asked to take out an actress for dinner one night?
Oh my gosh. I don't know. I guess no, not asked. Yeah, yes, no, it wasn't. Well, okay, a tiny bit of stepping on the punchline, but I'll try and make it great. I had come back. We'd been on location in Giant, and I got out of the Air Force, and Elizabeth Taylor had said, "Why don't you come to dinner?" Michael, she's married to Michael Wilding, said, "Call and we'll have you to dinner when you get back to Hollywood." And I'd thought about it, but I never did. And I was practicing my golf swing at Lakeside, and finally I called, and I asked, and the housekeeper answered the phone, or somebody, a secretary, and I said, "It's George Stevens Jr. calling for Elizabeth." Oh, and she came on the phone. "Oh, yeah, that's so great. Why don't you come for dinner tomorrow night? We'd love to see you," and all of that. And so, so I kind of figure out, got to think about what I wear and everything. And my father was away, and he had a 300 SL, the hottest car on the road, gray, gunmetal, and I took his car just because I thought it'd give me some confidence. Drove over the Coldwater Canyon, up the thing, and Liz lived up on, I forget the name, and drive up, and I'm beginning to wonder who I'm going to meet. This is going to be, because it'd be interesting. And I park in the porte cochere, and I lift up the thing, get out, and go, and I ring the bell, and two little kids run by, and it's her children with Michael Wilding, and then here's in a blue dress comes Elizabeth Taylor. I mean, she was the most beautiful, person, and so I said, and she said, "Oh, it's so great to see you." She said, "So where are we going?" and I wasn't a man about town. I didn't have a list of maitre d's, and so I kind of punted, and I said, "Well, what do you think would be fun, Elizabeth?" And she said, "Well, Trader Vic's is always nice, And I said, "Okay." So I went to the phone and I dialed 9411911 information, Trader Vic's, go call Trader Vic's, and the guy answers. I said, and I just had too much pride. I just said, "Hello, my name is George Stevens. I'd like, could you have a table for two in 20 minutes?" And he said, yes, come right over. So but the great thing was going out and lifting the door up and getting Elizabeth having to sit on the thing and swing her legs over and get in, and then you seal the cockpit, you drive down, And so, now I'm having this unanticipated, I'm taking the most beautiful woman on the planet out to dinner, and I drive up to Trader Vic's, and they're impressed by the car and the cargo, And and they lift up the door, and Elizabeth gets out, and you won't need a ticket, you know. And then we walk in, and I remember walking down the hallway. I remember it was an Asian man at Trader Vic's, and just walking toward him, and with Elizabeth, and we get there, and I'm worried about this having a terrible table and all of this. And he just knew enough about the movie business. He looked at her, and he turned to me. He says, "Mr. Stevens, we have your table right this way." He connected Elizabeth and A Place in the Sun and whatever. Anyway, so we had this great night and great dinner, and it went on. But we're going to go overrun our time if I tell the whole story. You're going to have to read it. Yes.
Just can you tell us a little bit more about the nexus of Hollywood and politics in Washington? I remember Nancy and I were at a few of the honors, and we'd notice for every applause line, John Kerry would be the first person to stand up the year before he ran for president. So I thought that was sort of a tell there at the honors. Such a place.
Yeah, I mean, I was really, in Washington when Liz and I were first married. Liz was, young but known, and Lily Guest, her mother, and I was sort of a unique kind of show business connection in those days. But we were going to learn that there was a lot about Hollywood and Washington that Sharif there, had in common. But actually, it was awfully nice in those days because there were interesting people. Republicans and Democrats lived in the city. Now so many of them leave their families at home and just come in 3 days a week, and they had kids in school together, in church. It was kind of a more harmonious time. It was not about money. It was what you knew, what you could do, what you cared about. Averell Harriman and Douglas Dillon had a lot of it, but that wasn't what it was all about. It was so it was just a very good time to be in Washington, and so I was bi-coastal, I guess, among the first. But there's a kind of a symbiotic thing, perhaps you'd call it, between Hollywood and Washington. And I've been part of that for better and for worse. Yes?
So who's more difficult to work with or direct, actors or politicians?
It's funny. Somebody asked me, I'll tell you, just a variation on that is, people asked me how, I was 29 years old when I went to Washington, and I was really ahead of this kind of department in a huge agency, making 300 documentaries a year and all of that. And people asked me, well, did you find it difficult? I mean, how did you adjust? I was working for Edward R. Murrow, which was, of course, a blessing. And I said I just kind of felt comfortable with it. I'd been on movie sets with my father, and I saw how he worked with actors, worked with studio heads, and so I was kind of comfortable with that. And Harry Cohn was the notorious guy at Columbia Pictures, but he asked Dad to come to Columbia Pictures and said, "I'll never come on your set, and you have final cut." And Dad made 3 great pictures at Columbia before going to war. And I did find myself in one of these interviews when I was asked that question of how I related rather comfortably to my position in this new world. I said, perhaps there's not that much difference between dealing with Harry Cohn and Lyndon Johnson. I think, what do we want to do about time here? I think we're...
One more question?
Well, I'll maybe I've got one other thing I want to get to, so I'll just maybe take that time with this. There's James Cagney, who became a dear friend of Liz's and mine, and his wife Billy. such one of the great actors, great person. When he received the AFI Life Achievement Award, which I started, and he was the second recipient, and he was retired and out of the public eye, and they drove across the country, Jimmy and Billy, and the night they arrived, or the next night, Henry Mancini, who's a good friend, the musician, and wife Ginny, who I worked with when I was directing Peter Gunn. Henry was doing the music. And he had just a small dinner for the Cagneys. And Jimmy was what they called a listening actor, which relates to your question. Good actors listen. And I remember watching him with Liz at dinner and talking about gardens and horses, and he was a listening actor. I just loved the way he was listening to Liz. But then when we were leaving dinner, Jimmy's only 5'6", but a great dancer, had been in vaudeville, of course. And we're talking about the show, the Life Achievement Award, 3 nights later. He said, well, I'm going to need a Getavasia. A Getavasia. I had to ask, what's a Getavasia? And he said, that's that little step you do just before you leave the stage so they remember you. Getaway. This is my Getavasia. Just to round it out. I picked up a copy of the Wall Street Journal at Billy Warren's on Friday and found a review of my book. And I know it is self-serving to read one's reviews aloud, but I was touched by something in this review because the writer came to a conclusion that is not anywhere stated in my book, but something that I hope is true. And I will read it. It says, George Stevens Jr.'s elegant and engaging memoir, My Place in the Sun, is that rarest thing, a portrait of a show business family, one that was and remains proud, honorable, and contented. And I think that is such a nice thing. Would you show photo 26? Now, 3 of the most alluring members of our family, our 2 female grandchildren, and our lovely Elizabeth are not in the picture, but we have to work with what we have. I think I would just like, I don't know who's here of grandchildren. Are any grandchildren here? Hello, John Cooper and somebody else, Nick. Wonderful. Okay, well, I want. Lily, she's one of the ones that I said was alluring. Very short this will be. In fact, this is going to be my Getavasia. Just reading one very short 2 paragraphs of the last page of this book. And the last paragraph, I will say that there is no paragraph that is more true than the last paragraph of this book. I'll start with the second to last paragraph. And of course, always in mind is my father. No, I never became the best film director in my family, but I had a father who looked beyond his own self-interest to urge me to take seriously Edward R. Murrow's offer of a job in Washington. offer a job in Washington. That generosity led to a life, my own filmmaker's journey, with dimensions I could not have envisioned, and fulfillments I could never have imagined. Let it be said that I have lived a life of great good fortune with a woman who, in the parlance of our family, stands the test of time with uncommon grace and beauty. Dining alone with Liz is my enduring prize.
Thank you so much, George. I think I could listen to your Getavages all night. And a little Come on, man. Come on. We've broken a few rules here already. We've gone over our time, but I could feel the audience wanted it. And we'll have another bite of the apple during the reception, so another opportunity. But I've read all 500 pages of this wonderful book, and as terrific as it was to see it on the written page, to hear his voice bringing the anecdotes to life was just exceptional. So thank you for doing that for us in our little modest island here. It's a real treat. All right, let's take a moment to turn to next week. We have a speaker whose name is Ken Hinman. He is the head of the National Coalition for Maine Conservation and the retired head of Wild Oceans. His whole mission is fisheries conservation. I think we'll all want to come and hear what he has to say. And he's going to have a reception afterwards too. So we're getting to have a little bit of a tradition here. But right now, for this evening, we're focused on George Stevens Jr., his glorious life in Hollywood and Washington. And thank you again, George. Oh, yeah. And there are books at the back of the room if you'd like to pick up a book.